Hi, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite heavy games. And I say this with a big notice at the beginning. I am a medium weight gamer at heart, medium weight Euro gamer in particular. And so this is a list that I've constructed from games that have been weight rated 3.2 or higher on BoardGameGeek. So that's 3.2 out of 5. I don't think there are any games on this list that go over 4. And most are over 3.4 or 3.5. So I won't go into what a heavy game is really here. That this is a determination that happens on BoardGameGeek when people decide to weight the rate. So I'll just leave that part at that. But I do want to say that this is very much coming from a perspective of I usually play medium weight games, and yet I like these games. I really enjoy these games. Including the honorable mentions. All the honorable mentions are games that I picked that just didn't quite make the top 10. They would easily make a top 20, for example, on this list. I do have one game that I want to mention up front. I didn't include a Stonemaier game on this list. Scythe is weighted, I think, around 3.2 in terms of the weight on BoardGameGeek. Obviously, I love Scythe. I'm the designer of Scythe. And Scythe has one thing that I think a lot of the games on this list echo, which is, and again, I want to stress, this isn't, in my opinion, what makes a great heavy game. It is what makes a great heavy game for me, and that is the streamlined action selection system in Scythe. You have a player mat that divides your actions into 4 different sections, and on your turn, you are choosing one of those sections where you activate the top row action if you want, then the bottom row action if you want, or you can just ignore the top row action and go right to the bottom row action. And you can't choose the same section of your mat that you chose on a previous turn. So streamlined action selection system. Scythe also has a lot of asymmetry, which you'll see in a lot of these games as well, and a lot of variety in terms of the things that can happen. I would say Scythe has fairly high agency. There isn't a lot of luck in the game, although there is a little bit of random card drawing that happens in the game, even though that can be mitigated as well. But these are things that I'll echo in when I talk about some of these other games, but I wanted to lead off with Scythe. And then other honorable mentions include Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, Spirit Island, Star Wars Rebellion, Gaia Project, Mombasa, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Millennium Blades, Sidereal Confluence, Terraforming Mars, Power Grid, Nemesis, Obsession, and Yedo. These are all games that I really, really do enjoy. I didn't tap into ambassadors for this list. These are games that Jamie Stegmaier genuinely enjoys, but these top 10 outweigh those by a little bit, at least in terms of how excited I am to play them right now. At number 10, we have Underwater Cities. So this, one thing that I've noticed about a lot of games on this list is a lot of them have a system that I've talked about in a different YouTube video where you're pulling things off your mat to make them better. And Underwater Cities has a little bit of that, although even more so in Underwater Cities, you are putting something onto your own private player mat. The action system in Underwater Cities is really, really nice in that you are playing a card. You're playing a card, and that card is essentially the worker that you're placing somewhere on the board. And if you match the color of that card with the section of the board where you're going to, you get an extra bonus, which feels really good. And one of the overriding things you'll notice about the games on my list, the heavy games that I really love, especially Underwater Cities, is that they are very rewarding games. You do have to plan ahead a lot in these games, but you are very rarely punished in these games for not having something. And Underwater Cities feels very much like a rewarding game. You're constantly rewarded with more stuff. Oftentimes, multiple things on the same turn you were rewarded with. And I think that's one of the reasons that I really, really love coming back to this game. That's Underwater Cities at number 10. At number 9, the first of several Uwe Rosenberg games, and that is Ora et Labora. This is at its heart a rondel game, but there's also a card section of the game that is really a very big part of the game. You have this rondel where you are selecting resources from the rondel and then shifting it to change the value of other resources that are on the rondel. So really nice system of player interaction here. You're always paying attention to this rondel and hoping to get better stuff from it, always manipulating this little market that you have on the table, and it's very easy and streamlined to manipulate. But you also have this card system that is really, really awesome. And you're playing these cards into your village, and where you place them often matters for what these cards do during the game and the points that they'll score at the end of the game. So you're not just playing cards, it's not just these cards that matter and their abilities, either whether they're ongoing abilities or new worker placement action spots, but also the exact placement of them in your village grid matters. Also, on top of that, I mentioned worker placement. You are often placing workers on the cards in your tableau, but you also can place workers on cards that other players have played. So it's one of these games, and I think this is one of the reasons that it's considered a heavy game, is that there ends up being a lot of information on the table. Even from the beginning of the game, you can see which cards that you can buy. They're all out there on the table. But also, as each player's village grows, you can see an increasing range of action options that you can select with your workers. So it's a lot of information. You have to be willing to consume a lot of information in Aura et Labora. But I like that, and I really like the sense of building your village, and I like the rewarding aspect of the Rondel. That is number 9, Aura et Labora. And number 8 is Dwellings of Eldervale. Dwellings of Eldervale is also a worker placement, worker movement game where you're putting some workers on a map and then moving them around to gain resources. It has a strong thematic side and a Merathrash side with these monsters that come in that you can fight. And there are these different, essentially, kind of dungeon paths that you can go down. These stacks of cards that you can enter into, or you can go into that stack and take care of the first card on the stack, the face-up card on the stack. So it's a really nice theme applied to this game. The thing that I want to feature the most about Dwellings of Eldervale is the asymmetry. It's a very asymmetric game. Several of the games on this list feature strong asymmetry, and I think asymmetry can add a lot of depth to a game that would otherwise be maybe a medium weight Euro game. Asymmetry can increase that quite a bit to become a more complex game because you have a lot to pay attention to in terms of what your individual faction can do. I actually think Dwellings of Eldervale streamlines that system really well, where they don't overwhelm you with too many different unique abilities. And they do this on your player mat, which is double-sided. You choose one faction on either side of your player mat. You have 4 different units listed on your player mat. And 2 of your units have a unique ability. They could have gone with all 4 units, but instead they went with 2. And I think that was a really good decision, even in a game that could have been even heavier. But I don't think heavier necessarily is better. More options isn't always necessarily better. And I think having a little bit of a focus on 2 units lets players parse that information a little bit more, and also makes those units feel a little more special. You have these 2 that are normal and based on the other games that you've played, but also 2 that are special, and gives you a little bit of a nudge to maybe get those units out on the board and see what they can do and follow the special abilities that they have. So I really like that about Dwellings of Eldervale. That's number 8. At number 7, I have a little bit of a cheat, and it actually goes against one of the things that I mentioned earlier on this list, and that is Agricola and Caverna. Caverna is essentially Agricola 2.0, even though I still enjoy playing Agricola as well. The reason it goes against one of my things on this list is that Agricola does have a slight punishing aspect to it, even though at its heart it's a very rewarding game. But basically, there are many ways in Agricola at the end of the game to get negative victory points. In fact, this will come up again in another Uwe Rosenberg game. I think this is fine. I mean, you could, as long as you are aware of it going into the game and you're able to feed your workers, the feeding part is a big part of these negative points that you can acquire if you can't feed your workers. That's all fine. But I think Caverna elevates it a little bit where it makes it a lot easier to feed your workers. And so it's you have a much lower chance of actually getting negative points in Caverna. Both of these games are worker placement games that have accumulation to them. So if no one chooses a certain action spot in a given round, the resources on that action space accumulate. I think that's a really neat mechanism in the game. It leads, again, to more player interaction. There's reasons to take a spot now, tension if you don't take it now, and you hope that you can take it later. Also, both of these games feature a ton of unique cards, especially Agricola. I think Agricola has more than Caverna. They have, occupations and buildings, I think, are the 2 names for the cards, but it's just a huge array of unique cards that you can either draft or you can randomly take at the beginning of the game. And I think a lot of the games on this list offer their depth and their replayability through a huge pile of unique cards. I really admire designers that can design so many unique cards, as we see in Agricola and Caverna. That's number 7 on this list. And number 6 is Clans of Caledonia. This is another game similar to a few that I mentioned already, where you are pulling things off your mat to reveal better income, and you're putting those things onto the board itself. Clans of Caledonia has a great action system that is wholly dependent on money. You are always spending money to do the thing on your turn. That's all you're doing. You are choosing one thing to buy, and you're buying that thing with the money that you have. And you can go in deep with something really, really expensive at the beginning of the round and only have a few turns that round, or you can try to space out that money and have a lot of little things that you can do over the course of the round. Again, a common thread of this list is streamlined action selection system. And several actually of the games on this list have this system of you get a bunch of resources at the beginning of the round, especially a particular type of resource, maybe a few different resources. And once you are done spending those resources, your round is over. Another game higher up on this list does the same thing. So Clans of Caledonia does that. It also has a great economical element of the game, this economy board, where you can use that board to buy or sell a resource, and you change the value of that resource on the board itself. There's a lot of other things. In fact, all these games, I'm barely touching upon the best elements of these games because there's so many little intricate systems in these games. But if they're implemented in a way that's easy to remember and where it makes sense, that's one of the reasons they're on this list. And I think that's one of the driving forces behind why I keep returning to Clans of Caledonia at my number 6 on the list. And number 5, another Uwe Rosenberg game that is a feast for Odin. This is a wonderful game where you are, it's a polyomino game where you're taking these little polyomino shapes that you're earning from a vast variety of worker placement action spots. I think like 61, 62 different worker placement action spaces. And you're putting them on your board or these other islands that you can go explore. And you're trying to complete rows and columns and surround other shapes to gain those shapes as resources. It's a really neat spatial puzzle. It doesn't make all that much sense thematically, but it's a great spatial puzzle. There are a lot of things going on in this game, including a ton of unique cards again, which Uwe Rosenberg is fantastic at. It does have feeding, but the feeding is the easiest in this game of any Uwe Rosenberg game, which I think is one of the reasons why it's higher up on this list than the other games. And also, I mentioned the action selection system. 61 different actions that you can choose from. That's a lot. It's a lot to choose from. A lot of different paths you can take, a lot of depth, and a lot of feeling of, okay, I went down this path this game, I'm going to choose these actions this game and try to maximize them. But even despite that number of actions, Uwe Rosenberg managed to streamline them by dividing them into columns. So the first column requires only 1 worker. Second column is 2 workers, then 3, then 4. So on your turn, you are limited at least by the number of workers that you have. And also, you're kind of deciding, similar to what I said about Clans of Caledonia, do you spend 4 workers right away at the beginning of the round to get an action that you really want and a very powerful action, but then you know that you hardly have any workers left for your other turns that round. So that's a fun decision point, and I like that it's broken down into those columns. So you can kind of say the first thing that I want to think about is maybe not necessarily which action do I want to take, but how many workers do I want to use right now? And that, among the many other mechanisms in A Feast for Odin, is why it's at number 5 on this list. At number 4 is Russian Railroads. There are many different things that I like about this game. Quick recap about how the game works is it's a worker placement game where you're placing 1 or more workers depending on what an action spot is asking for. And you are gaining different things that either increase your engine, or it's all increasing your engine, or increases your ability to do things in the game. So it's kind of unlocking these tracks that you're going down on your player mat. Again, a lot of these games have your own player mat. Let me count the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I won't say 8 there. Almost every one of these games has their own private player mat. And in this way, I want to stress that a lot of these games on this list, maybe even all of them, have very high agency and even very close to perfect information. Agency means that you have a lot of control over your choices. You have near perfect information, so you know what's out there on the table, and you are making a fully informed choice about what you're gaining. And there's no random element to it. Dwellings of Eldervale is maybe the one game on this list that has actually no, Feast for Odin does have some randomness to it too. A little bit of dice roll that you can mitigate. But a lot of these games have very, very high agency. And I think Russian Railroads, I could be wrong, but I think it has near perfect information and full agency throughout the game in terms of the worker placement and the different tracks that you're building on your player mat. So I think that's something that feels really good about Russian Railroads. And also, again, similar to many of these other games, you're choosing a path. So you can't fully develop all 4 of your different railroad paths. But so any given game, you might say, okay, I want to focus on these 2 paths. Or for now, I want to focus on this one. I'll decide my second path later. And it leads to this feeling of, oh, I want to come back to this game and do these in a very different order. And this is even without the asymmetry. There's expansions that add asymmetry to Russian Railroads, but you're kind of choosing your own asymmetry as you play because you can't do everything. That is why Russian Railroads is the number 4 game on my list. And number 3 is the first game in a while that I actually own, and that is Tzolk'in. I love Tzolk'in the Mayan calendar. I think that I know the designer has some problematic issues that he's struggling with and hopefully learning from, but the game itself is a game that I really, really do love. It has these gears that you're turning, you're placing workers on these gears, and those the benefits that you get from those workers when you take them off change based on this giant middle gear turning, and which turns all the other 5 gears and ages the benefits on them. It's a great system with essentially 5 different mini games that you're paying attention to. Each gear does its own specific thing. So you're deciding, okay, where do I want to put the worker? How high up on that gear can I put the worker based on other workers that are there? And what am I going to focus on? Am I going to focus on going after some monuments for endgame points? Am I going to improve my engine, my ability to do better things via the tech tracks? Am I going to focus on the cult tracks and move up those tracks and gain income benefits? So you have income benefits, you have ongoing benefits, or making the actions better. It has like every form of engine building that I love. And a lot of these games have a strong sense of progression and engine building. Tzolk'in, I think, has perfect information. Yeah, I think it does have. Yeah, I guess you don't know the next tiles that are coming out in the top row, but pretty much Tzolk'in has perfect information in the game. Not that I necessarily need perfect information, but I'm just noticing that as a common thread throughout this list. And the action selection system is really simple. You're either placing a certain number of workers, depending on how many you want to pay for, or you are retrieving a number of workers based on how many you want to retrieve at that very moment. Very simple system. I really, really like that. It is very thinky, though. I mean, one of the reasons it's a heavier game is that you really need to plan ahead. That timing really matters. Getting into that flow of the game of placing some workers, pulling them off at the right time, that has a huge impact on your success in this game. That is Tzolk'in at number 2. At number 3, I'm sorry. At number 2, this was really tough, deciding my number 1 and number 2 here. I love both of these games, and one is very new, and one I've played dozens and dozens of times over the years, and will continue to do so. But right now, I think I'm going to have to say that I'm going to choose the heavier of the 2 games. And the lighter of the 2 games, as heavy as it is Terra Mystica. I love Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica is a game that has almost every element that I mentioned on this list. It has a unique player mat. It has high player agency. It has perfect information. It has a ton of unique decisions that are boiled down to a few simple actions, and you're taking just one of those actions. It has that thing where you're getting a bunch of resources at the beginning of the round, and you're spending them at a rate that you decide that you want to spend those resources. It's also strongly asymmetric. I think that's one of the core features of Terra Mystica. The exploration of the game, the depth of the game, comes from the asymmetry of each of your different factions. Let me see if there's anything else in this game. I guess the one thing it's missing, it doesn't have a ton of unique cards. It doesn't do that. It leaves that out. But it still has so much depth and complexity to it. But for me, it's an old favorite now. It doesn't feel as heavy. I think that's one of the reasons I didn't put it at number 1. To me, it doesn't feel as heavy anymore because I know the game so well, which I know is highly subjective. But this is my list. And also, it's a very rewarding game. You're constantly getting more and better stuff. I really love that. And engine building, yeah, checks off all of these lists, every item on this list. Let me see if I should mention one thing that I really love. I think it really does come down to the asymmetry. I love exploring the different factions and seeing what they can do in this game. I tend to gravitate towards the red factions because I generally play red in games, but I will gladly play any random faction. And it does the thing that many of these games do, where they give you a faction mat, and you decide which side of that mat you want to play, both of them sharing the same color pieces. I think that's really, really clever. But yeah, I love Terra Mystica. I will always come back to Terra Mystica. However, my number 1 game on this list is very new, hasn't even come out in most places, but I have a copy because we have a very close relationship with the publisher, or the German publisher of this. That is, I turned myself on mute for a second there. And that game is Ark Nova. I have been loving Ark Nova so much, and I'm putting it on this list because Ark Nova is a very heavy game. There is a lot going on in Ark Nova. Let me see if I can pull some of the stuff out of the box to illustrate that. Ark Nova has a ton of unique cards, so that is one part of the game where you have they don't even fit. They fit into multiple bags because they're these giant stacks of mostly animal cards, some sponsor cards, and some conservation cards that you can play throughout the game. Or projects, I think they're called. So it has all these unique cards that really vastly changes the feel of every game that you play. It has player mats that are kind of buried under all my stuff here, so I won't reveal them. So you have player mats that you can either choose a basic side, you can choose a more complex side, and then there's an even separate set of new player mats. I haven't even gone to these player mats yet that are even more complex, and you can choose either side of those. So there's a total of I don't know. There's 20 different options that you can choose from in this game, although 5 of those options are identical. In Ark Nova, you are building a zoo. So you're building kind of structures on your player mat and putting animals in those buildings on your player mat. And many times when you're doing this, you're getting multiple rewards. If you play an animal, some of these animals have instant benefits. They also have maybe ongoing benefits, whether they're kind of actively ongoing benefits or they just say, okay, it makes it a little bit easier to play this next animal. And some of them even have endgame benefits. This isn't just animals. All the cards have this type of thing where they either have some combination of instant, ongoing, and endgame benefits, which feels really good. So it's essentially, it's not really multi-use cards, but it's multi-ability cards, which feels great. There are also a number of different paths you can take in the game. So there's this reputation track that you can pay attention to if you want to. Gives you access to better cards, gives you more one-time abilities. There is appeal, so you can make your zoo more appealing, so more people come to your zoo. And when they do, you increase your income. They're paying you money, so you gain more money every round. Or you can focus on conservation. And if you focus on conservation, it's a track that's moving in the opposite direction as the appeal track. In conservation, you are getting powerful one-time benefits. And the whole point of the game is to get those two paths to cross. Conservation, you can move up much faster. So each conservation is worth between 1 and 4 appeal. So getting a single conservation can be worth up to 4 appeal. It can be it can have this multiplicative effect that feels really good. Also, all this boils down to a very streamlined but very feel good, a mechanism that feels really good in the action selection system. You have these 5 cards. I'll pull up these cards. You have these 5 different cards, and on your turn, all you were doing is choosing to activate one of these cards. They start off on the blue side. They're on your kind of below your player mat, and they're aligned with your player mat in such a way that they're numbered 1 through 5. So if you play the 5 value card on your far right, it is really, really powerful at that moment. But when you play it, you remove it from the card row, place it down in the 1 slot, and shift all your cards over. So you're always kind of deciding which card, when is the right time to play this card? How powerful do I need this card to be before I can play it? Also, similar to in Civ A New Dawn, which I forgot when I filmed my video about Ark Nova, but you can upgrade these cards. So you have these short-term goals in this game of, long-term I want to get appeal, and even in the short term I want to get appeal to get those income. But and conservation, long-term goal in the game, you want to get conservation, but also it's also short-term because you want to race to get the one-time benefits that other players could take away. But you also have a short-term goal of upgrading these cards. How can you move ahead just far enough to upgrade these cards to the backside to make them even more powerful? That feels really good too. So throughout the game, like every choice you make is often double rewarding and also gives you an interesting decision point of when is the right time to do this. It's going to benefit me in the long run, but it also benefits me right now. I think that was really clever to include that in the game, that nearly everything that you can gain in the game helps you now and later, leading more to the depth of decision making in this game. It is, again, a heavy game. It takes around 30 minutes to teach. However, once you really know how to play, we flew through a game the other day, not including setup. It was already set up for us. But we played a 2-hour game for 4 players of Ark Nova, which was impressive. I thought this was always going to be a 3-hour game. But to get through such a heavy, satisfying game in 2 hours was amazing. That really hits my sweet spot. And that probably elevated it to become the #1 game on this list. I know it hasn't come out in most places yet, but I highly recommend checking this out if you do enjoy heavy games, or if you are like me, you are a medium weight gamer who likes streamlined action systems and complex variability throughout the game. Ark Nova is a great fit for that, as are all the games on this list. I think, yeah, so if I'm very curious to hear if you're like me on this list. If you're a medium weight gamer that sometimes delves into heavy games, but they kind of need to scratch the right itch. And that's the itch that I've talked about today, how these games scratch it with streamlined action systems, maybe a lot of unique cards to add to replayability and choices, high level of agency, unique player mats, sometimes asymmetry. It doesn't have to be often asymmetry, and often these games are very rewarding. And ultimately, I think all this boils down to these heavy games you have this feeling of mastery. Like, it feels really satisfying to me to stumble through a complex game the first time, even though I understand the core system of it, and then want to return to it right away so I can get better at it, so I can master these different elements and try different paths. That feels really, really good to me. I think that's the satisfaction I get from the heavy games that I mentioned today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your definition of a heavy game might be different. That's fine. I'm using the 3.2 weight on BoardGameGeek as my threshold for that. But I'd love to hear some of your favorite heavy games and what makes them come to the table for you? Why do you gravitate towards them? Why are you drawn to them? And I especially like to hear if there are any gamers like me, whether you're typically a medium weight gamer or typically like a certain type of gamer, and yet you gravitate towards these heavy games or specific heavy games. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that if you're that type of gamer. Or you might just be a gamer who loves heavy games, and that's okay too. I'm happy to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.